So where we left off is that we had set up our OBS so that we had a few different scenes. We had a couple different audio inputs here set up, and we've done a little bit of kind of setup work in TouchDesigner. So we've got our different kinds of transitions that we've seen here. We've got these audio controls. This is all looking pretty good so far. So it's, I like what we've got here. This is great. But now what we might want to take a look at, and our kind of next step is, how do we find a way to actually control this from TouchDesigner? So our next step, if you haven't done this just yet, is you'll want to take a moment to install this WebSocket plugin. And that again is available here. You can find it kind of two places. This is the link to actually go to the from the forum for OBS. This is what will take you to this place where there's all the information about it, and then you can actually download it directly here and install it from GitHub. So I'll post both links here in the chat. Hopefully you've had a chance to install that already. I'm gonna wait just a moment. I'm gonna wait to get an all clear from all of you that you've had a chance to install the OBS WebSocket plugin. Hopefully that should install without too much trouble. You might need to restart OBS. OBS is an interesting animal. It doesn't tell you that it's saving your scene collection or your profile, but actually it has done that. There's both a scene collection, your kind of scene collections, right? So all of your scenes and your inputs, and then also your profile, which contains all of your kind of like output and input resolution information. It's helpful to know that you can actually change all of those here. So, you might make all sorts of different kinds of these at one point or another. And it's helpful to know that you can both find your scene collection and your profile information up here. What I did for this workshop was I made a brand new empty profile and an empty scene collection. So hopefully we all started in the same place, kind of brand new and fresh. Those pieces can also be imported into OBS. So also included here in our repo, and let me bring up our repository here for the project one more time. I've also included the OBS profile and then also the OBS scene collection. So if you wanted to revisit this or you wanted to see exactly how I had mine set up, you can download and import those pieces also. Those are also available in the repo. Has everyone had a chance to install the WebSocket plugin so far? I'll wait anxiously to see in the chat that everything is okay. All good, all good. Hooray, glad to see it. We get to our plugins, and it's helpful to know that the place where we kind of navigate for some of these things is over in Tools. So in Tools, when you install something, you'll actually see those kind of new pieces show up over here. So there's a plugin for NDI, which is very helpful if you're using NDI at all in any of your workflows. And you'll also see this WebSockets and server settings. And this is what we're going to open up. I'm going to go just a little bit slowly so to give folks one more moment here. This WebSocket server is how we can both turn this on and turn it off here from OBS. And this is where we set our server port. So if we need to track down this number, by default, it's 4444. That's what we're going to use. You might see that your enable authentication is turned on, and you'll want to turn this off. We don't want to enable authentication this round, just because it'll be a little bit dodgy for us all to do the same thing there. But it's helpful to know that this is where you would set your passcode or your password if you're using authentication. So again, that looks one more time like I go to Tools, and then from Tools, I'm going to go down to WebSocket Server Settings. I want to make sure that my WebSocket server is enabled, and then my port is 4444. I also want to make sure that I've turned off this enable authentication. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Does everyone, I think we've got 3 all good so far. I'll give you all just one more moment to kind of make sure that's all looking hopefully the way that we want it to. What I'm going to do here is I'm also just going to go ahead and I think I'm going to just snap my OBS here over to my left-hand side. And then I'm going to put TouchDesigner on the right-hand side. I'm just going to rearrange my screen just a little bit because I want us to be able to kind of see both of these at the same time. So hopefully we'll be able to see both of these. It's going to be helpful for us. You know, my preferred workflow is that I find that it's often helpful to have a text port. And so I would recommend that you do something like split your setup here and like scooch your one window over there on the right-hand side or left-hand side, whatever better for you. I'm going to set this to be a text port in DATS. And then I'm also just going to go ahead and save this format. I'm going to call this debug. You'll find that if you're doing a little bit of Python writing, it's often helpful to be able to come back to this kind of layout really quickly. So we can kind of jump from just our single network editor and back to our debug layout. I find that I use that all the time when I'm trying to figure out, I want to see my whole network and just all of this stuff. And then I want to get back to my debug viewer really quickly. It's nice to have that there in the right-hand side. We've got another all clear coming in little bit by little bit. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to, I think what I want us to do is let's hold on to this work that we've already done here in TouchDesigner. So I'm going to add a new base and I'm just going to call this WebSocket basics. And let's go ahead and grab all these pieces and just copy them inside. So we can see that we've moved all these pieces inside of our DAT here, and we can get rid of these. This is a good time if you haven't saved your project. I would recommend that you save your project. I'm going to do that same thing myself. Make sure that I've got a, you hope that things don't go wrong. But in case they do, it's good to know that you have a kind of safe place for where your work lives. So if you haven't saved, this is a good time to save your work. Okay, let's add one more base. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to use this to see our OBS WebSocket basics. So we're going to do kind of all of our WebSocket fundamentals in here to actually kind of get a handle on understanding exactly what kind of mischief we might be able to get ourselves into here. So let's head inside. And while we're in here, let's go ahead and add a WebSocket DAT. So our WebSocket DAT, right, it's going to need a network address and then a network port. So because this is all happening on the same machine, we can set this to be localhost. So localhost is, you can have your choice whether you want to use your localhost address 127.0.0.1, or if you want to just do localhost, both of those will resolve back to your machine. You also hear that called loopback sometimes, and that just means it's a way of passing a network message inside of your own machine and not out to the outside network. Our network port, again, that's over here in OBS. If we take a look at our WebSockets server settings, 4444. So let's go ahead and change that, 4444. Great. And let's do ourselves a favor, just like we did before. So let's come down here. I'm going to go ahead and bring up our DAT here. And I want to on connect. I want to print connected to OBS. And I'm going to take advantage of the same thing. I'm going to come down here, and I'm also going to print disconnected from OBS. So this way I've got a nice kind of, handy way to know inside of my text port. I disconnected from OBS and then I connected to OBS. So good to see. I'm connected officially to OBS over here. So this is where things should hopefully get really fun and exciting. So let's take a minute first just to kind of do a little bit of kind of playing to see what happens when we change something here in OBS. So hopefully when I click on a scene, haha, look at this, I get all of this message information about what happened inside of OBS. So I can see, and what we'll do is we'll actually pull apart some of these messages here as well. So we get these big JSON blobs that describe all of the stuff that's happened over here. So let's change our scene. Aha, looks good. Let's change this maybe to fade. We can see that I changed my transition type to fade. Okay. I changed my scene again. I changed my scene again. All right. My volume changed. Right. So all of these pieces that we're getting messages about, there's a good chance that we can then change those things in OBS. So how do we get started with some of those pieces? Just like TouchDesigner has this handy little Python helper, right? Hopefully you've seen this Python helper before. And what this does is this, brings up the Python help for any given operator, which is great. This API, this WebSocket API, has its own set of documentation. And that documentation is going to be really helpful for us in terms of finding out what exactly this thing does and how we can control it. And I'm going to go ahead and paste this information right here into the chat again for us. So this has not only like how's the authentication work, this tells us events, great. So how, a switch scene event, what information do we get? And then we also have a whole block down here called requests. And requests are what we're going to send to OBS when we want something to change. So if we take a look at requests, this is actually going to tell us all of the things that we need in order to have a kind of successful request event. So requests are sent by the client. In that case, that's TouchDesigner. TouchDesigner is the client that is talking to the WebSocket server that's running on OBS. So we have to send a request type. That's a string. Okay, it's good for us to know. We need to send a message ID. Okay, that's also going to be a string. Great. So once we send that request, what's going to happen is that the server will return a JSON response with at least one of the following fields. Okay, status, our message ID, status, error. So what do we get back? Well, we get back exactly the message ID that we sent to OBS. So this could be really helpful. We're not going to take too much of a deep look at this, but this would be a great, important thing to think about in terms of if you want to know if a message was successfully received and acted on, you can get a confirmation back from OBS about a very specific message ID. What we'll do is we'll actually set up an auto incrementing system. And that could be really essential for kind of checking, does the message ID I sent match up with a message ID that I received? If you want to really kind of keep tabs on making sure that every request that you sent was responded to, or if you needed to resend it. We'll also see that there'll be a status. So, okay, we'll know, is everything okay? Did that work? And then we could also get an error. So if we don't format our message correctly, we should get a message back that says, hey, you did that all wrong, and that didn't work. Try again. So this is really, really helpful for us to know. Okay, so let's start to look at how we might format some of these kinds of things. So I think the first kind of simplest one that we might think about is just changing scenes. So what I want to do is I just want to change my scenes over here. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to drop down to text stat. I'm going to name this change scenes just because it's helpful for us to have a descriptive name for our text stat. We want to come back to it. And these are going to become kind of our essential recipe guides that we're going to use later. So let's open this up to edit it. Just like we did before, we're going to import JSON because we're going to need that JSON module in order to do the action that we want to do. We're going to have a message that we're going to send that is a Python dictionary or a JSON block that we're going to send over to OBS. Now, our documentation told us that we need a few kind of essential ingredients for this to all work. So we have to have this request type and we have to have this message ID. Okay, so I've got a request type. Okay, I don't know what that is just yet, but we'll figure it out. And then we have a message ID, and They said that can be a string, so let's just call this, let's like just call it 1 to get started. That seems like a safe kind of message ID there. And then we probably have to tell it some other thing. Okay, so now the question is, I want to change scenes. How do I do that? Well, if we go back to our documentation for this, we'll see that we have all of these request types, okay? And let's go back to our table of contents here at the top. Okay, what have we got? We've got a few different pieces here. General, media control, sources. Okay, there's lots of source options, outputs, scene. Oh, set current scene collection. So we could set our scene collection. We could also set some scene items. Here in scenes, this is really promising. We can set our current scene. So to set our current scene, what do we need to do? We've got to include this piece, right? So in addition to the other elements that we're going to send, we're also going to say, send this key, scene name. So let's come back here. So scene name. And then the scene name that we send, oops, let's come back to our API, is the name of the scene that we want to switch to. That seems pretty straightforward. The other piece that we need here is our request type. And our request type is this name right here. So set current scene. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to say that we want to set current scene. So please change the scene that I'm in. And we're going to send a string for this. And if I look here in OBS, right, I've got nice little names, scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. Important to know that spaces and capitalization matter, right? This is going to be kind of a string matching situation. So it will be valuable to make sure that these match exactly. What we'll talk about at the end of the workshop is how you could set up a system to ask for all the scenes and then build a set of parameters that already knows exactly what's in OBS. And that's like the more advanced kind of fancy way to think about this, rather than having a chance that you might kind of write it wrong. Just ask OBS, what scenes do you have? We'll build a parameter that looks just like that. For now, we're just going to do it manually because that way we can really understand the nuts and bolts of what we're up to. So we're in scene 3, and I think I want to change to scene 1. Okay, so I want to change to scene 1. Okay, excellent. So there's my message. The next thing that I need to do is I need to take this whole dictionary block and I need to convert it to a JSON block. So I'm going to call this, my variable here is going to be called JSON payload. And this is going to be JSON dumps. And I'm going to convert my message. Dumps is a method inside of JSON, inside of this module, that's going to convert this, our type here of dictionary into a JSON blob. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just print out, right? So I think I want to use an F string again. Message sent. And I'll do a pipe and I'll do my message, right? I'm going to print that piece right here. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and send this. So my operator, what's my operator name? Let's go back, check here in TouchDesigner. Okay, WebSocket 1. So op WebSocket 1 dot send text. What am I going to send? I'm going to send my JSON payload. Oof. Okay. So I'm going to leave this up here on the screen for just a moment in case you need to copy any more of this. I'm also going to go ahead and copy this text. And I'm going to paste it right here in the chat. And I'm going to say this is our simple script. So just in case you need to send it, see it. I didn't test it yet, so there's a good chance that there's a typo in there. So we might have to, I might need to make some edits. So apologies. Part of writing Python is making mistakes and then fixing them. So let's see if this works, right? We're going to go ahead and save this. Let's come back here to TouchDesigner. I'm going to bring up OBS so we can see it. And then I'm going to run this scene. Whoa, okay. Right, so that's the kind of idea that we're working with right away. Is like Now we're able to control OBS from TouchDesigner. And we can, update this as easily as changing which scene. So, maybe I want to go to change scene 2 instead. Okay. So let's run that. Works like a charm. And we'll see over here, right? Let's go ahead and clear our output. And I'm going to manually change us. I'm going to clear our output. And then I'm going to run our script, because what we should see is that, look at that. So we got a message back, right? Message ID, remember we gave this a 1 name for our message ID, status okay. So we got a response back from OBS that, hey, everything worked great. It did just what it was supposed to do. Okay, I love that. That's very nice. Excellent. What else can we do with this? Well, let's also take a look at, maybe we don't want to just change scenes. Maybe we also want to change our transition. I like that. So let's go ahead and just copy our text here. And I'm going to call this change transition. And let's edit this one as well. So now I don't want to change my scene. I want to change my transition. Now we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to go back to our API. And in this case, I'm just going to search for transition, because this is kind of a fast way for us to look here. Okay, so we've got some override functions. Okay, that's rad. We might even go up here to our table of contents, where we'd be able to see these pieces at a glance faster. Okay, transitions, switch transitions. Okay, we could see all these pieces. So these are all events. These are things that we get from OBS, right? And requests, those are the things that we send to OBS. So let's see down here in requests what we've got. Down in requests, let's keep going, let's keep going, let's keep going. Wow. Aha. Set scene transition override. Okay. So we've got some override options here. Aha. So we have a get transitions list. That's going to be helpful a little bit later. And we also have a set current transition. Okay, so we can set our current transition. So let's go ahead and just copy that. Let's come back over here to our text editor. So we're going to set our current transition. We always have to have these two. We always have to have the request type, and we always have to have our message ID. And then the next thing, let's check back with our API. Aha. So we need a transition name. So let's go ahead and copy that. And we'll see here, we need the name of the transition. Okay, so we're going to follow the same rules. So let's go ahead and change this. We've got a transition name. Let's come back to OBS and let's look at our name. So we've got cut, fade, swipe. So let's change it to swipe. So I'm going to go back here. Transition name is swipe. Great. So let's save that. We don't have to change any of our other code, right? The rest of our code just is going to echo to our text port what we sent, or convert it to JSON, echo to our text port, and then next what we're going to do is we're then going to send it along to OBS. So let's go ahead and see what happens if we bring up OBS here. I'm going to keep an eye right here where it says fade, and then let's run this. Look at that, it changed. Love that. That's great. I'm just going to copy and paste this little bit of code right into our text port, not to our text port, to our chat. So you have a copy of exactly what I wrote. What's important to know is that if you've named your transition something different, or if you don't have this swipe transition, then you might get an error. So it's important that this exists inside of this list, right? That's kind of like one of the important things to know, is that we can only ask for OBS to change to one of the things that already exists for us. So I like this. This is great. Let's get a little fancier. Why don't we? I'm going to make a copy of this one, and I want to change my transition and scene, right? Because I can also imagine a world where maybe we want to change the transition and then we want to change the scene. How are we going to do that? Well, let's take a look. So we've already written a lot. We've written a lot of this code already. So let's just borrow these pieces here. I'm going to borrow that bit. I'm going to open this one up to edit. And I'm going to come down here to the bottom. And so I'm just going to make one change. I don't want to confuse my variables. So this is our first message. And I think what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to call this scene message. So our scene message is also what we're going to convert to our JSON payload. And let's call this scene JSON payload. We shouldn't have to do this, but for the sake of making sure that we're really, we've got a kind of clean way to decipher what may have gone right or may have gone wrong, it can be helpful to use different variable names in these kinds of situations. Our Python is typically going to execute from top to bottom, and changing a variable name like this shouldn't present an issue for us. When we're debugging or we're first exploring something, it can be really useful to do this kind of really explicitly first. In the off chance that something has gone wrong, we'll have a better way of kind of tracking down what's right and what's wrong here. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is, I think I want to change scene 3, and I think I want to change this to fade. So that's what, let's come back here. So what do I want to do? I'm going to change this to fade, and then I'm going to change this to scene 3. Let's save that. Oh, that's an excellent question. So Nicholas just asked if our message ID needs to be different. It doesn't technically have to be different, but it would be good practice for these to be different message IDs, because if they were the same message ID, then, and we were trying to figure out, well, what went wrong? Did our set current transition not run, or did this one not run? Our message ID would be the way that we'd be able to kind of trace back to what failed or what didn't fail. Okay, so let's give this a save. Let's come over here and let's see if that works the way that we expected, and it did. I love it when things work the first time. They never work the first time. It's so nice when they do. So I'm similarly going to copy this code block and paste it here into our chat so you can see exactly what we've written. This is great. I love where this is going. This is, filling me with joy and happiness. I love that we've got a little bit of kind of handle on how to change some of these pieces. The next thing that I want us to look at, the last one before we kind of move away from some of these initial pieces, is to see how we can change the audio, because the audio is going to be one of those other pieces that I'm going to want to have. And I would guess that you're probably going to want to have also. Having some way to have an audio mixer that you can control remotely rather than having to think about how to mix the audio in Touch can be really helpful, especially since audio can be a little bit dicey when you're doing all these other kind of pixel kinds of operations in TouchDesigner. So with that in mind, let's go back to our API. I know I'm sure I sound like a broken record, but this is hopefully, one of the pieces I hope you take away from this workshop is that a lot of the work that we typically do is always comes down to reading the manual or reading the documentation over and over and over again. And if I just told you only the secret words, but didn't tell you where to find the secret words, I don't think that would be fair, because what I really hope that you do is you walk away from this workshop and you figure out all of the things that you want to integrate and include, and figure out how to build the tool that's just right for you, not necessarily how to build the tool that I think you should build. Okay, so what have we got? So here are our events. Let's take a look. We got to come down to our requests, sources. Okay, there's so many sources. Recording, great. So I'm just noticing as we're cruising by here, we can both start and stop recording. We're going to come back to those. I would bet there's also a start and stop streaming. That's just my guess. I've also read ahead, so I know that's there also. Scenes, streaming, aha, start and stop streaming. Studio mode transitions. Okay, I don't see audio yet, so let's do a little search for audio. Aha, there we go. Audio activated mixes. So we've got a few things here in sources. What else? Get audio active. Okay, so we probably figure out which audio is active. That might be helpful. Look at that, set volume. That is what I bet we're gonna want. Okay, so similar recipe, right? We need to know the source. We need to know the volume. desired volume must be between 0 and 1 for mole and under 0 for dB. Okay, great. Interesting. So we also have this variable here, use decibel. This is optional. We don't have to send this. Interpret volume data as decibels instead of as amplitude. Okay, we might want that. So let's keep an eye on that one. And let's come back to touch. We're going to add, let's actually just copy paste our scene transition, and I'm going to change this to change audio. Let's go ahead and open this up to edit it. So again, here, we know that we want to use this set volume command. So our request type is going to be set volume. Excellent. Message ID. Thank you, Nicholas. Let's change this to a different ID this time. And now we have a few other things that we probably need to pay attention here. Okay, so we've got a source. We have to set a source that we want to change. Okay, so we're going to need a source. What exactly are we changing? I'm going to leave this empty for now. We also need to know, okay, what is the volume level we're changing this to? That's going to be valuable. We do want to do that. And we might go ahead, and while we're at it, let's check here. Desired volume must be between 0 and 1. Okay, good. That probably means that we can actually just send this a value, like an integer or a float, excuse me. Let's go ahead and let's explicitly tell it that we don't want to use decibels, that we do indeed want to set this as an integer. So I'm going to copy use decibel, and let's come over here. It tells us this is a Boolean. Okay, great. So a Boolean in this case is going to be true or false. And we're going to say false. Excellent. So let's turn the volume up to 1. So we're going to imagine we're going to manually set the volume to 0. And then let's see if we can set that up to 1, kind of essentially to turn it back on. So this all looks right. Let's come back here to OBS. Okay, oh, we need to pick a source name. So I think Mike is who I want to change. And again, remember, these are going to be, the string is going to be an important thing there. So if you named this something different, you'll need to make sure that you use the name that matches this parameter in touch. So who is my source? Mike is my source, okay. So let's turn that down. Great, and then let's see if we run that. Oof, gorgeous, amazing, I love that. So here, I'm gonna copy this, and I'm gonna paste it into our chat also. So we just about have the essential ingredients that we need for the kind of parameters that we want to manipulate and change, which is amazing. We're going to come back to all of those pieces in like 3 seconds, not 3 seconds, after our next break. But we're going to use these recipes for all of the operations that we're going to do, and we'll build some custom parameters and kind of some abstract code elements that let us make all those changes from touch. Yes, excellent. Lovely question from Rob. Will I share my file as well? I will indeed. What I'll do is I'll save this here, and I think I can actually, oh, you don't want to let me paste a file in there. What I will do is I'll share this here. So you'll find all of this work exactly what we've done so far. You can find inside of the tool file in the in the repo, and it's inside of one of these bases that's called WebSockets Getting Started. Right? I've been cheating. I wrote my notes ahead of time, so I already know that the things are working, hopefully. And you can find everything that we've done is right here. So if you want to follow along a step at a time, you could grab it from here. So if you want to be able to just copy paste right from the project or see it itself, that's where you'll track it down. So before we step away for our next break, the concept that I want us to take just a moment to look at is called inheritance. And we're going to use inheritance because we're going to use a kind of intermediate style Python technique to separate out some of our Python code and kind of do some more abstract work so that we don't have to write a bunch of if, else, and more complicated statements. Like having a way to kind of cleanly separate out our code can be really helpful, especially if you take this project and build it into something bigger. You'll want to have a kind of clean way to separate out the actions that we're going to run versus the kind of messaging and communication pieces that we're going to do. So to see how that works, what we're going to start with is just a really, really simple example. So I'm going to start by adding a base, and I'm going to put that here in our project. And I left our WebSockets behind, and I came up here. One thing that's, before we do that, let's actually head into our WebSockets, and our WebSocket let's go ahead and turn that off. Because if we leave that on, we won't be able to talk to OBS because it's going to be trying to talk with this WebSocket. So let's turn that off. I'll remind you when we come back to this because that's tricked me before. So it's good to know that we need to turn that off. I'm going to call this base inheritance. And let's head inside. We're going to write just the simplest little extension to try and get a handle on what this means. And hopefully, hopefully we'll walk away from this feeling like we kind of understand a little bit more about how this works and walk away with a kind of better understanding of how this works in TouchDesigner. So I'm going to add a text stat here. And in my text stat, I'm going to go ahead and write just a little simple stuff. So I'm going to start a new class, a class called my great class. I know, such a fancy name. I'm going to do a very simple thing. I'm just going to start with our initialization statement. So we're going to init. I'm going to pass it myself as an object and my op. And then I'm going to assign the member my op to my op, this thing that I passed into it. So this friend is going to get passed in here and it's going to belong to self. Great. Next, let's write one little simple function. So we're going to write a function called add vowels. That takes the first argument there is the self. And in classes, we always reference our self object. And then I'm going to pass it a vowels list. And what are we going to do? We're going to return the sum of our vowels list. So all this little function does is this list of numbers that we're going to give to it, it's going to add them all up and give it back. That's it. Nothing fancy at all. We'll get much fancier later, but this is all that we do so far. Okay. I'm going to change the name of this to text superclass. Okay, great. So now I'm going to add another text stat. Crazy, I know. Revolutionary, it is. And I'm going to call this one just text class. So let's go ahead and edit this one. Now what we're going to do is we're going to declare our superclass. So our superclass, what is that? We're going to use our modules on demand in TouchDesigner. So that's our parent dot mod. So we're going to import a text stat as a module, parent.mod text superclass. We're going to also grab from that my great class, because that was what we called it over here, right? My great class. We're going to grab that and we're going to assign it this superclass variable. Great. So now we start a second class. This is just my class, because it's right. It's instead of my great class, this is just my class. Okay. And what it takes is we're going to pass superclass into this thing. I know it feels deep and feels weird. I promise it's going to all make sense in just a minute. We're going to start with the same ingredients. We need to initialize this thing. Self. Okay. My op. Seems familiar so far. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take that superclass and we're going to run the init function on it. And we're going to pass it our self variable, the self variable from my class, along with my op. So we're going to pass this back over to this class. Okay. One last thing. Now let's write a little function here. So this is going to be a method called maxVals. It takes our self variable, and then we're going to take a vals list again, right? And this time we're going to return the max of the vals list, right? So here, what we do is we add these values together, and here we just give back the biggest value in the list. This is an entirely arbitrary kind of examination of superclasses versus classes, but it's helpful for us just to kind of see inheritance in action. That's really what we're up to here. Okay, so now we can come back to TouchDesigner, and let's go ahead and open up the parameters for our base inheritance. We're going to assign an extension, and what I want to do is I'm actually going to use this class object instead, this this Python extension. So me.mod.text class, okay. And what are we going to use? We're going to use my class, and then I'm going to pass it me, right? That's the TouchDesigner way of saying pass this operator. And then I'm going to promote this extension. So we'll see, we've got this little dotted line. That's fancy. I like that. And what that means is that this class is inheriting, it's getting all of the things from this superclass. So that means that if we've got if over here, maybe what we want to do is we want to print our parent, and we want to do add vals. And again, we're just going to pass this a list, right? 1, 2, 3. What we should see is, hopefully if we did this right, aha, so 6, that function lives in this class, but we could also run this maxVals function, okay? So maxVals, that's 3. So the kind of concept why inheritance is so cool in this particular case, right, is that this class here is a kind of smaller subset. It's a kind of like more refined thing that's inheriting all of the members of this class. Where this is really interesting, and right, like part of the connection that we can make in the TouchDesigner world is that if we click on an operator, right, and let's grab our Python help, this notion, right, that we see up here at the very top, every time we see this class inherits from the dat class. Part of what that means is that anything that we can do to the text dat, or anything, we can run any method on the text dat that we can run on the dat class. The dat class inherits from the op class. So, right, so our dat is a specific kind of op, and our op is a single operator. You know, the kind of, as you peer behind the curtain of what is Python and how does Python relate to inheritance, and what is inheritance in terms of object-oriented programming and all those kind of complicated things, it's helpful to kind of see that these similar ideas are things that we're already familiar with, right? We already know that we can ask for the name or the path or the digits for any operator. And part of the reason that we can do that with any operator is that a single dat, or even the text dat, inherits from the dat class, inherits from the operator class. So it's kind of like a narrower thing, right? We're going to take advantage of that for some kind of very specific uses here in what we're going to do next. But it's worth kind of seeing that kind of right in front of us so we can understand how that works. The cool thing about this is that to our kind of execution here, when we run our scripts, it doesn't matter which one of these extensions that this is written in. We kind of get to both of them by way of our just regular class. We get everything in our superclass. So what that means for us is that we're going to start to think about how we use our superclass to kind of handle all of the important messaging and command features that we need to. And then we're going to put all of our kind of parsing and stuff that's like not particularly fun to do in our inherited class. Because this is where we're going to kind of fix some of the problems that it's not uncommon that we'll run into when we start to think about the challenges of creating a parameter execute. I always feel like when you're doing a big complicated parameter execute and you've got lots of if, else, else if kind of statements, you start to run into these really like wobbly gray areas. And we'll actually do a little bit of housekeeping to make that really simple and easy. Let's leave this behind. Let's not forget to save our work. Go ahead and save your project where it lives right now. Before we leave, before we take our next break, let's also go ahead and make sure to double check that we've turned off our WebSockets for where we started with our just simple our WebSocket basics. That's going to be important for us. And then let's set ourselves up to be successful here for the next bit. I'm going to go ahead and head over to comps. We're not going to use anything too fancy yet, but I think it's worth kind of starting with our widget operator instead of working with a base or working with a container for this example. Widgets are this new lovely operator that are going to have some kind of extended functionalities that exist in the future. And as we start to build our own modules that we want to have that are reusable and extensible, it's kind of worth thinking about putting them in widget components to get started so that we don't have to kind of go back and do a bunch of kind of fixing and changing later. I'm also just going to go ahead and set this up to have a square aspect. So let's go ahead and set it to be 300 by 300. And the last thing we do before we walk away for our next break is let's go ahead. Well, let's give this a better name. I'm going to call this OBS simple because we'll make like a simple version of our widget here. And let's head inside and just add our logo. So inside of that assets for our project, we'll see that there's a logo folder. And so we can just bring this in. And then let's also do like a little transform. We can like scooch this down just a little bit here. We'll like do a little scale down. And then let's use an over top and a constant. We can set our over to use the fixed layer 1. And let's give this like a gray color. This way we've got a kind of nice icon for our widget as we get started. And then last but not least, let's add a null. And I'm going to call this null logo. Or actually, let's call it null icon. That's a better name for what this is. I'm going to scoot this all the way over here to the left. We'll step out and let's just set on the look page of our little OBS simple / null icon. Ah, great. I love it. Now we've got a nice little clean looking logo here for this fancy widget that we're going to work on next.